Hello everyone and welcome back to game week 1 of the 25-26 Slater and Gordon Championship, live from the Lee Westwood Sports Centre, where you join me for Norwich City versus Nottingham Forest. Let's go through the squads, starting with the very impressive Norwich City. Exceeded a lot of people's expectations in the opening day with 3 wins from as many games. They're comprised of Jacob Edwards, Mike Coleman, Johan George, Tom Burnett, Hannah Murgatroyd and Jack Fulcher. And for Nottingham Forest, they have the following: Gary Meakin, Jack Bosanquet, Toby Maurice, Riley Priestley, Finley Cooper, Ben Rogers and Sam Rogers. That being said, I don't think Gary Meakin or Jack Bosanquet will feature in this fixture all weekend. But it's good to see Sam Rogers playing football. Don't recall ever watching him before. And if he is as half as good as his brother Ben, that's a very exciting talent. If we're assessing the live league table, you'll see it's a very different question for these two squads. A win for Norwich City would see them go back to the top of the standings with 12 points from their opening 4 games. For Nottingham Forest, they're still chasing that first win, that first draw, them first points, and it will be a tall ask to get it within this one. But one thing this weekend has shown me already just how competitive, how unpredictable this division is. Next up on Court A, Leeds Dynamos take on Manchester City. A win for them would take them on to 7 points, but they will be chasing that top pack. It's just so exciting. If we can reference the league's top goal scorers, you'll see that Kieran Wade of Nottinghamshire leading the way with 6, Naglis Montvillas with 4, Tom Burnett, for me the story of yesterday's action, marking his debut in the National League. He's only ever competed regionally prior to this. 3 goals, which came in 3 consecutive games. What a start for him. And then Leighton G, Sam Langley, Kean Collins all on 3 apiece, with Liam Chadwick and Jamil Khan both on 2. But it's really exciting everywhere you look. To go through the full schedule of today's action, as already mentioned, Leeds Dynamos Manchester City on Court A. Following this one, scheduled for 11:35, Baggies take on Nottinghamshire and Hull and East Yorkshire take on Manchester United. 12:45, Villa Rockets Lions take on GBG Saracens, and Teesside Steel take on Leeds Dynamos. That should be a brilliant game. The penultimate game, Nottingham Forest versus Hull and East Yorkshire, and Manchester City versus Altrincham. And then our final fixtures, 3:05, GBG Saracens versus Manchester United, and Teesside Steel versus Norwich City. So the team's just warming up, ready for this fixture. We are soon to be underway. We go through the actual results of these two yesterday. The tale of two halves, of two ends of the table. Norwich City begun their 25-26 season with a 1-0 victory over Altrincham. That followed a 2-1 victory over Villa Rockets Lions, which on reflection now is looking like a fantastic win, because they're well on course to secure 4 wins from their opening 5 games, and then they beat GBG Saracens as well. For Nottingham Forest, slightly different in terms of results. They started with a encouraging yet frustrating defeat to Teesside Steel, 3-1. They went a goal up in that, and that followed a 4-0 defeat to Altrincham. So based on form, based on expectation and what we've seen, you would make Norwich City the almost clear favourites in this one. But I've learnt to be very cautious with my predictions. So the captains are in the centre, Mike Coleman and Ben Rogers. At the conclusion of Game Week 1, we will of course be conducting a series of individual awards. Team of the weekend, Player of the weekend, Unsung Hero of the weekend, now proudly sponsored by Swizzle, so you can shine a light and a spotlight on some of the top performers. I know one thing's for certain, several of these Norwich City players will be in contention, most notably Mike Coleman, who for many was the standout yesterday. So Ben Rogers, with responsibility of the kickoff, will likely just fire it diagonally up the court just to gain some territory in the Norwich half. He actually opts to go back to Riley Priestley, which is a brave approach. The teams as they line up: Norwich City, Hannah Murgatroyd in goal, Mike Coleman, captain in the centre. On the right wing, Jacob Edwards. On the left, Johan George, as Ben Rogers into Riley Priestley. I think Priestley needs to front bumper that back to Rogers. Mike Coleman able to come across. Nottingham Forest, Toby Maurice, Ben Rogers, Finley Cooper and Riley Priestley. Already it looks like we've got a really open game on our hands. I hope it maintains this level of intensity. Rogers into Finley Cooper. Johan George just blocking up that passing lane. He's unable to keep it in play. Should there be any updates on Court 8, I'll bring you them. It looks as if Leeds Dynamos have taken a very early lead as Jacob Edwards engages it with a 180. Had he connected with that, we could very easily be looking at the opening goal, because Toby Maurice went to cover the right-hand post, which was probably the right option. But if Jacob Edwards had seen it, there was a huge gap towards the left-hand side. Encouraging signs early on from both. Having watched that 3-1 defeat to Teesside Steel, it's some of the best football I've seen Forest play in a long time. Competitive, organised. They put together some fantastic combinations, and that's something they're going to have to replicate. They can't be one-off occasions. That being said, they have had a tough fixture list as the ball rolls to Ben Rogers. Johan George does so well, as he so often does, in just putting his chair in areas and channels that restrict the passing lanes. Toby Maurice has to be very considerate of these goal kicks. Shaping up to pass to Riley Priestley, but Johan George is there to intercept, as he does, and the ball nearly finds a way into that post. It was so predictable. So it's frustrating that despite that likely outcome, that's still the intended action. A high kick in for Norwich City and Johan George. Across the box, just off the front of Mike Coleman's bumper. I suspected he was acting as a screen to Jacob Edwards. Cross to Jacob Edwards, who has an attempt at goal. Really well saved by Ben Rogers. They're knocking on the door. Jacob Edwards putting himself into some fantastic areas. But 4 minutes in, Forest remain resolute, but this will be a long game as Johan George now attempts an effort, just fired high off of Ben Rogers. 2-on-1 in favour of Nottingham Forest. It's a tight one, that, obviously, between Mike Coleman and Johan George. Rogers into Finley Cooper, that's much better. Just needed Riley Priestley to be a metre or so towards his own goal, which would have allowed him that angle to generate the counter-clockwise strike back out to Finley Cooper. But that's a similar passage of play which saw them unpick Teesside Steel yesterday. Mike Coleman. It's a more favourable angle, this. It's a nice channel through to Johan George. I suspected it would go to Jacob Edwards at the back post, but a clinical strike from Johan sees them take a 1-0 lead 5.5 minutes in. Really is fantastic stuff. We're seeing Norwich hit heights that many didn't think were possible. And whilst they've always been a solid competitor, if and when they're featured in the Championship, acclimatising to the departures of Henry Barnard and Thomas Donaher, you could have accepted if they just quietly went about their business in this division, picking up points here and there just to accumulate enough to ensure you're not towards the jeopardy spots at the bottom. But 4 games in, they're on course for 4 wins. As Johan George is going to just force it over the line. An easy goal for him. The conversation is being had by Alan Murray and Pete Westmoreland, and the goal does stand. Johan George with a brace. Having recorded a podcast with Rosie Hodgson in the week as to cast our Championship predictions, she put a fairly bright spotlight on Johan George as a player to watch, a player who could really come into his own in the 25-26 season, to step up And he's done exactly that so far, not just in this game, but the weekend as a whole. And that is beautiful football. Jacob Edwards needs to stay in reverse there whilst the danger is still live. I hope he can see how taking that in his stride and looking to swipe into it would have been more beneficial than driving head on. But the diagonal switch from Johan George just completely took Ben Rogers out the game, and then he looked to contribute on the follow-up. As Pete Westmoreland just has a conversation with Jacob Edwards, who's given what looks like a final warning. These Dynamos impressing on court A. 2-0 up against Manchester City. The exact same scoreline here on court B in favour of Norwich City, as that ball has too much pace for Riley Priestley to engage. Hannah Murgatroyd intercepted by Ben Rogers. He has to make a late adjustment and would have liked to have seen Finlay Cooper just try and move his chair out the way there and ensure his side came away with a kick in. I do understand that was a lot of pace and power, so he would have done incredibly well to secure that outcome. But that's better from Nottingham Forest, just engaging a high press, looking for those interceptions, as a little feint from Mike Coleman just completely relieves pressure on those deeper than him. Finlay Cooper now just hesitates to engage it. Needed to go back to Ben Rogers there with the front bumper. All the way through. It's options on the bench for Norwich City. Jack Fulcher and the impressive Tom Burnett. Sam Rogers waiting to come on for Nottingham Forest. I don't recall Sam Rogers ever featuring in the National League. I could be corrected on that. But if it is his first ever outing at Championship level, huge congratulations to him. Ben Rogers into Johan George. You're seeing how fluid this system is as Riley Priestley looks for the gap, doesn't have the accuracy. How fluid the system is for Norwich, that when Johan George engages the battle in the centre, Mike Coleman will push to one of the wide areas. And their 2-on-1 discipline is typically very good. Finlay Cooper just taking a position in this bottom left-hand corner. Receives from Riley Priestley, too close to one another. It's frustrating for Forest because these are small mistakes that will compound as the games and the seasons go on. Small instances where they can get their starting positions Mike Coleman and a Murgatroyd push right up in the Forest half. Bravery. This is unlike anything we've seen of Forest so far, and she beautifully distributes it out to Jacob Edwards. I don't think it's unfair to say that Norwich City are typically a very defensively minded team. They have often in the past, when they've looked to secure results, relied on the dribbling game of Mike Coleman and just trying to force it up the court. But what we've seen in their 4 games thus far is a real want to play open, expansive football, which is a joy to watch. As Johan George has responsibility. Across to Jacob Edwards, slightly too deep to engage that at the first time, certainly in terms of a shot on goal, but Mike Coleman can follow it up. Right decision there, just off the front of Ben Rogers. Johan George to take. I suspect Jacob Edwards will be the intended target, or maybe a front bumper advancement of Mike Coleman. He feints to engage, and it almost needed him to connect with it. Jacob Edwards would have had to have been 2 or 3 metres deeper to capitalise. Johan George. Advantage played despite that 2-on-1 in Forest's favour. Ball just trapped between that defensive pair of Nottingham Forest. Johan George now patiently lets that roll out of play. Johan George, quickly taken, not to the referee's whistle. So, a second attempt into Mike Coleman, just trickles its way into the box, asks a few questions of Toby Maurice. Trying to find that gap that isn't there on that left-hand post. Heavy trapping of the ball. Good 50-50 exchange. Forest have settled slightly into this fixture, but Norwich City just commanding it in terms of possession and attacking intent, as Hannah Murgatroyd with a full 180 trying to engage that with a very fiery shot. She had to be considerate of Riley Priestley, who closed the gap. But again, I have very little to fault. I love the fact that Hannah Murgatroyd is pushing forward, looking to contribute, as Norwich City make their first change of the day. Johan George with a brace coming off. On comes Tom Burnett. The debutant with 3 goals in 3 consecutive games. As Ben Rogers back to Finlay Cooper. He needed to take some off of it there. There is always a tendency to think that you have to be as powerful as possible, but there is a skill in taking power off as it ricochets towards Toby Maurice. The follow-up effort from Jacob Edwards is nearly capitalised on. I understand players wanting to fire it up the core, and momentum plays such a significant role within Powerchair football, but Finlay Cooper was too close to Ben Rogers there to ever be able to receive or shape his chair in a fashion that generated something positive. So just knowing when to take 20-30% off that rotation is a skill that I would challenge him to have and work on. He's got possession now into Finlay Cooper. Nice front bumper pick off into Riley Priestley. That's much better. Having worked with Finlay Cooper, it's something that I've challenged him on, is the utilisation of them front bumpers and how useful they can be in almost using the ball's momentum in his favour. And on that occasion, maybe a 180 could have been adopted by Riley Priestley. Nonetheless, that's a bright spell, and that's almost to be expected, that 2-on-1. But I can also understand their positions because both wanted to cover the Norwich City shirts, and their Norwich City shirts were probably just over 3 metres away, so maybe a needed 2-on-1. It's Ben Rogers, 180, fires it towards the goal. Again, it's clear that Ben Rogers can connect with the ball, can generate the power. But on that instance, taking 30% off the ball and allowing Riley Priestley to make his advancements out on the left-hand wing of Nottingham Forest would have probably yielded more success. So it's all about decision-making for Forest. It was the case yesterday. It's appearing to be the case here. But there is clear positives. Toby Maurice needs to direct those. Again, Finlay Cooper and Ben Rogers lacking that positional awareness. Do well to escape the indirect free kick, but good advantage from Pete Westmoreland as we now are 30 seconds over the regulation 20. On reflection, a brilliant opening half for Norwich City, but Nottingham Forest have grown into the game and had a few chances of their own. If they can be a little bit more clinical in the final third and a little bit more assured in their decision making, they could easily get back into this. Thank you all that are tuning in. I'll be back very shortly for the second half. Hello everyone and welcome back to the second half of Norwich City versus Nottingham Forest in game week 1 of the 2025-26 Slater and Gordon Championship. Currently 2-0 to the now league leaders. Let's show you the league table very quickly before we get proceedings back underway. You see what a potential 3 points does for Norwich City here. It would secure them 4 wins from as many games, 8 goals scored, 2 goals conceded, so a +6 goal difference. And when you're looking at how dominant Nottinghamshire have been, will we see goal difference be a deciding factor come season's end? We are now back underway. Mike Coleman into Ben Rogers. Just one change for Norwich in the break. Jacob Edwards off, on comes Jack Fulcher. So really nice, dynamic Norwich City side now. That'll be looking to inflict further damage. The teams in their entirety: Norwich City have Hannah Murgatroyd, Mike Coleman, Jack Fulcher and Tom Burnett. And for Nottingham Forest, Toby Maurice, Ben Rogers, Finley Cooper and Riley Priestley. Ben Rogers into Riley Priestley. Nice connection now to Finley Cooper. Nice worked opportunity. Just combinations like that are something that they didn't have last season in their arsenal, but they've shown it consistently across their games in game week 1. Whilst the success hasn't necessarily been there, the intent most definitely has, and I think it's only a matter of time before it clicks. It's Mike Coleman restricting as Finley Cooper, nice front bumper pick off into Riley Priestley, who does likewise, just out of play. Bright start to the second half from Nottingham Forest. I have a real soft spot for them, and I want to see them succeed. I want to see them surpass positions of the last 2 or 3 seasons where they've been drawn into those bottom placements. But it's going to need them to learn from their mistakes and develop as a collective. Riley Priestley following it up. That's a really good clearance from Hannah Murgatroyd to take Priestley out the game. Looks like a real fantastic game on Court A, where Manchester City have just half the deficit against Leeds Dynamos. This division is just absolutely incredible. It's Ben Rogers and attempts an effort at goal. I truly believe anyone has the capabilities of beating anyone else. And I don't think I've ever really been able to say that in either one of the divisions. Yes, seasons gone by have been incredibly competitive, but we almost see distinctive packs at the top and the bottom. And whilst I'm not saying that won't be the case in the Championship, we saw Nottingham Forest, a team I'd predicted to finish 12th, really take the game to Teesside Steel, a team I'd predicted to finish 1st yesterday. So encouraging signs, and based on what I can see, Manchester City aren't resting on that scoreline. They're looking to get back into this. Thomas Met and Greg Baxter calling the action live. This, of course, also live on the WFA's YouTube channel. But thank you to everyone that is joining me solo as Norwich City are commanding a 2-0 scoreline over Nottingham Forest. Jack Fulcher, nice switch of play to Tom Burnett, attempts an effort at goal. I mean, I don't blame him, having been so prolific yesterday, but instances like that show a little bit of inexperience. I think I would want him to return to Jack Fulcher there as opposed to going for goal. I think Toby Maurice had the post covered, and now a chance for Finlay Cooper, patiently waiting, just can't get the time in, which is really unfortunate. Even with that, Finlay Cooper was unable. And now Tom Burnett again, look, on that occasion, just as I wanted him to do in the situation prior, looks to switch the play. One thing that I have noted, it hasn't become too apparent because the ball hasn't made its way out there, is the hesitation of Jack Fulcher to play in reverse on the wings, and he's losing a little bit of momentum and pace. But very positive signs from Norwich City and Nottingham Forest for that matter. Had Finlay Cooper connected with that, we're seeing them half the deficit completely against the run of play. From bumper needed from Ben Rogers there, but goes out to Riley Priestley. Mike Coleman was always going to close the gap. Again, it just comes down to decision making from both sides, because Norwich City could have a far more comprehensive lead than that of just 2-0. Murgatroyd into Tom Burnett. Lovely switch of play. Jack Fulcher fortunate to come away with the Norwich City ball there. Again, just that eagerness to drive forward. If he'd just taken that in reverse, it would have opened up the options, both as to the central player and the alternate winger. But of course, a bit of a grace period needed. Jack Fulcher missed the majority, if not all, of last season. So firstly, it's great to see him back competing at this level. And it will take him a few game weeks to get up to the pace and the expectation of this incredibly demanding division. And now we're talking about Norwich City in the context of challengers, as Tom Burnett desperately tries to make it 4 goals from as many games. Has an attempt. Yeah, as we're talking about Norwich in the context of potential champions, it puts a lot of weight and expectation on these players, something they probably wasn't prepared for, as Riley Priestley almost didn't know how to engage that to best capitalise on the lapse in concentration for Hannah Murgatroyd. An open game. It's been one of my favourites to watch. It's nice from Tom Burnett. Finds Mike Coleman, who's going to return the favour. Switch of play, just doesn't get the angle. I can see exactly what he was intending there. He wanted to find that diagonal channel to Jack Fulcher, and it was just a matter of timing. A millisecond or two later in engaging it, and it would have found the Norwich number 21. Such a good game of football, so many positives. Mike Coleman into Jack Fulcher, who just lets that roll, does well to break away, now swipes it back into the path of his captain, but intercepted by Ben Rogers, and Riley Priestley's connection just lets him down. We come back to those very few moments, the fine margins about timing, connection, intention. That's where it's being let down by for Forest. It's not through the want of trying, but I truly believe these are things that will come. The sharper the players are, the more they train, the more they compete regionally and nationally. And come game week 3 or 4, I think Riley Priestley probably scores from that. It's Mike Coleman. Needs to be careful of Ben Rogers. He goes back to Hannah Murgatroyd, who switches it into the channel. I like that, but it needs Jack Fulcher to be far more advanced in order to capitalise. He was always playing catch-up. Toby Maurice into Ben Rogers. Direct free kick for Norwich City. who haven't had it all their own way in this second. Good work from Ben Rogers. Goals in the 5th and the 6th minute from Johan George sees Norwich command the lead. I think Mike Coleman was looking for that channel to Jack Fulcher. There is an eye on goal because Finley Cooper can't adjust to the right, otherwise it would be 3 in the box. So surely the option, Jack Fulcher at this back post. It has the accuracy, goes all the way through. And you have to ask question marks of this Nottingham Forest defence. They'd put all their eggs in the basket of almost covering Jack Fulcher, and in doing so, straight from the kick-in, Mike Coleman can slot it in. Just when Forest were starting to build a little bit of momentum, Norwich impart their influence, their quality and their know-how to go 3-0 up. Jack Fulcher all the way through to Tom Burnett. Just had to retract a few metres and wasn't able to capitalise on the momentum. Fulcher, nice dummy from Mike Coleman, guides it goal bound, switches play. Fulcher with the front bumper. There's no real intent on that. So Ben Rogers doesn't have a great deal of difficulty in nullifying. Still leads Dynamos 2. Manchester City 1 on Court A. I'll show you the league standings at the conclusion of this one, so you can see just how good it looks for Norwich City, who had an incredibly tough 24-25 in the Premiership. You could almost completely understand if they would be devoid of confidence and needing to rebuild, as Hannah Murgatroyd breaks away just to relieve pressure, and Toby Maurice happy to let that roll out of danger. Just one more game following this for Norwich City, arguably their toughest of the weekend against Teesside Steel. Prior to the weekend kicking off, you would have said almost a certain 3 points for Teesside Steel, but based on relative form and results, maybe you have Norwich City as the favourites in that one. Teesside Steel just flattered to deceive a little bit in game week 1, having watched both of their games against Manchester City and Nottingham Forest. They struggled a great deal, certainly based on the high levels that they set last season, and a real switch up for Norwich City sees Captain Fantastic come off, Mike Coleman. On comes on Jacob Edwards, and now, even more exciting for me, Tom Burnett featuring in the centre as he picks it off, as Jack Fulcher strangely was drawn into the action towards the left. Can he influence the game? Just think it's incredible that relative novices, when it comes to National League football, can come in and just slot in so seamlessly, not look out of place, but beyond that, thrive and be top performers. I know, based on what I've seen, Tom Burnett will almost certainly feature for my considerations for fantasy team of the weekend and maybe even player of the weekend. It's going to need a big performance for him and Norwich in that matchup against Teesside Steel later today. But it's so nice to see Norwich City thriving. Only were able to accrue 4 points from their 22 league games last season in the Premiership. Only 1 win across the entirety of the season as well. That was against Nottinghamshire in the final weekend, but Sam Rogers, for his first involvement, nearly connects with that 180. Riley Priestley, the player that's come off. So good to see Sam Rogers feature. 5 minutes remaining. Norwich City 3, Nottingham Forest 0. Sam Rogers to take. Can he establish that chemistry and connection with his brother Ben? They combine here. Just trying to engage it in the dribble. Then Rogers switches play over to Finley Cooper at the back post. Looked almost a certain goal, I don't think it would have counted. The referees are having a conversation, but you're seeing the success from Nottingham Forest, a lot of which has come from when it's compact, it's tight, and they just find those pockets to break. It was the initial combinations, but it was the switch of play. I think Finley Cooper, irrelevant of if it would have counted or not, will be disappointed he wasn't able to capitalise. That starting position and angle is so important. You need to be constantly moving and mirroring the play out wide to ensure if and when the ball ricochets in your favour, as it can so often do, you're ready to capitalise. And that's lovely combination play. That's more on Jacob Edwards there. He needed to drop off as soon as he had picked it off into the path of Tom Burnett. It would have been a tall ask because they were so close together with their starting positions. But in terms of Tom Burnett as a central player, I can't ask anything more of that. Sam Rogers to take this. I would assume a goal would be nothing more than a consolation, but it's the small wins that Forest need to take in fixtures such as this. Their single goal against Teesside, a real bright spark and something to build upon. The same will be here if Sam Rogers can distribute out to one of Finley Cooper or Ben Rogers. I suspect Finley Cooper is the intended target eventually, but it goes to Ben Rogers in the centre, which was an interesting option for him to engage at goal because that defence was so congested on one side. Sam Rogers, I think, needs to be picking that off. Just need to ensure that 2-on-1 discipline. I think they do just enough to back off. Finley Cooper adjusts late. And the right decision from the referee. But take nothing away from this collective effort of Nottingham Forest. They will ask questions of a lot of teams in this division. That I have no question. Their final game of the weekend is against Hull and East Yorkshire. Currently sit bottom of the standing, so when you're referencing form and momentum, that arguably presents the greatest opportunity to register points, if not the ultimate win. We are now approaching the final minute in this fixture, and it's been a great game of football. Norwich City just so professional in getting the job done. Commanded that 2-0 lead in the opening 6 minutes, and since then they've just controlled the tempo. They've switched, they've altered, they've put valuable minutes into the whole squad. And already they're one of my favourite teams to watch. Sam Rogers, interestingly, Ben Rogers never had the angle there. He's a real, I think he's a diamond that needs shaping. Ben Rogers has so much potential. Pushed for a player of the match. I think it's hard to look beyond Mike Coleman in controlling the performance in the first half. That's Finley Cooper, and then followed up by Sam Rogers, a late adjustment from Hannah Murgatroyd. It's really unfortunate. There is a gap there. Into Ben Rogers, over to Finley Cooper, engaged with the front bumper, and again, Finley Cooper just doesn't have the starting position to capitalise. He could have had 3 or 4 goals in this game. And I hope that's just a matter of sharpness, that as the season progresses, they can be more and more proficient in those opportunities. Tom Burnett won't be able to make it 4 goals in 4 games, but take nothing away from his influence. Firstly out wide, and latterly in the centre, where he has not looked out of place. Into Finley Cooper, into reverse. Burnett just pushes it into the space. Jack Fulcher will do very well to keep it in play, but it won't matter because the full-time whistle has been blown by Pete Westmoreland. It is a comprehensive, confident 3-0 win for Norwich City, which sees them go back to the top of the table. Let's show you those standings so you can see just how good it is to be a Canary. 4 games played, 4 games won, 12 points, a positive goal difference of 7. And they will be looking to ensure that they end the season with the end of the weekend with maximum points, where they play Teesside Steel, who still have title aspirations of their own. Thank you to all that have tuned in. Next up on Court B, it's Hull and East Yorkshire versus Manchester United.